and I'm in the now. And it don't take no x-ray to see right through my smile. I know I be on the go, and it ain't no drink out there that can numb my soul. Oh no. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. Can you tell me why? Every time I step outside, I see my niggas die. Oh, I'm letting you know that it ain't no gun they make that can kill my soul. Oh no. Say, all we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free.
So now it's like the officer's pulling him inside the car. He's trying to pull away. And at no time the officer said that he was going to do anything until he pulled out his weapon. His weapon was drawn, and he said, "I'll shoot you," or "I'm going to shoot." And in the same moment, the first shot went off. And we looked at him. He was shot, and there was blood coming from him. And we took off running.
Are we all alone, fighting on our own? Please give me a chance. I don't wanna dance. Something's got me down. I will stand my ground. Don't just stand around. Don't just stand around.
And as we took off running, I ducked and hid for my life because I was fearing for my life. And I hid by the first car that I saw. My friend, he kept running, and he told me to keep running because he feared for me too. So as he was running, the officer was trying to get out of the car, and once he got out the car, he pursued my friend, but his weapon was drawn. Now, he didn't see any weapon drawn at him or anything like that, us going for no weapon. His weapon was already drawn when he got out the car. He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the earth, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots, and my friend died.
All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free.
Be free, J.J. Cole. Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York. We've all seen or heard the disparate racial numbers on crime data across the country. Here's some you may not have read specifically concerning New York City crime statistics. In New York City's 4 major boroughs, through court monitoring reports over the last 4 years, which included 5,162 cases observed, 4,645, or 90%, involved New Yorkers of color. These were the most prevalent types of arrests coming through the criminal justice system and the individuals charged for those infractions. The NYPD continues to engage in an aggressive application of a type of broken windows policing that does serious harm to selected communities in our city. Nearly 2 million punitive interactions occur between the NYPD and New Yorkers every year. The vast number of these quota-driven punitive interactions, including summonses, traffic tickets, and arrests, affect New Yorkers of color. Over $1 million per day, or over $410 million a year, is spent by the NYPD on this broken windows approach, which means that every day the police charge, confine, and criminalize hundreds of people of color for minor infractions. This is the true tale of the two cities that we New Yorkers live on. It's a stark counterpoint to the publicized positive impact of the policies as opposed or exposed by the NYPD and the mayor's office. The everyday reality is that the NYPD and courts inflict incalculable harm, hardship, and human misery on great numbers of vulnerable and disenfranchised people. It's a significant waste of resources that would be better spent on collaborative, neighborhood-based law enforcement programs and social services that address the real social and economic problems that drive unlawful behavior. The NYPD and mayor's approach is just simply stupid and cruel. Today we'll be talking to the founder and executive director of the organization that collected the data I've just read, the Police Reform Organizing Project, or PROP. He's been an activist, community organizer, and public policy advocate in New York City for over 40 years and served as an executive director of the watchdog agency, the Correctional Association, for over 29 years. He's the host of a new radio show on WBAI called Justice Matters, Thursday, 5:30, 6:30. Okay, we'll go into that. And in a saner world and more just New York City, he would be visiting us here on the Radical Imagination as our mayor. He came up short this time in the last election, but that wasn't because of his lack of trying, intelligence, and certainly not because of his compassion and understanding of what it would take to build a truly transformative criminal justice system, which would go a long way to creating a more just and radically loving city. Welcome back, Bob Gangi, to the
Thank
Radical
you, Jim.
Imagination.
Pleased to have me. I want to make the point about my mayoral race that
all right.
I did come up short, and that's because the people who voted for me only voted for me once. I told them.
There you go.
10 times, 15 times, as many times as you can get to the polls.
Whatever it takes.
Yes, whatever it takes. What I did learn, and I feel I do feel naive, that it took me at least a little bit by surprise, is how, and New York's supposed to have a very fair and model kind of campaign finance law, how the way our campaigns are run and managed and supervised by government agencies really stack the deck in favor of people either of incumbents or people of access to money. The most dramatic representation of that is in order to participate in the official debates, the televised debates.
Which you were not allowed to do.
I was not permitted to do because I didn't raise the threshold amount of money, which was $175,000. Wow. And that's a lot of money to raise for a political candidacy where the contributions are not tax exempt. It's a lot of money to raise for virtually anything unless you have access to sources of wealth or individuals who are very wealthy. And the mayor obviously does. And the only televised debates for the mayoral race in the Democratic primary involved de Blasio going up against Sal Albanese. And Sal Albanese, who I got to know a little bit during the campaign because we debated each other on a fairly regular basis at political clubs and that kind of thing. So, good guy. I disagreed with him on certain very important policy areas, but Sal, in order to make the $175,000 threshold, he had to turn to the Patrolman Benevolence Association.
Really?
It's now called, they took out the man recently, so I think it's the Patrol, I forget what it's called.
Okay.
But now the name does not includes the realization that women are now a significant part of the police force. But in any case, he got almost $5,000 from the
Police
PTA,
Benevolent Association.
Police Benevolent Association, right. And which is the union that represents police officers, which is a regressive force in the city's politics today, led by an outspoken leader named Pat Lynch, who sometimes, not always, sometimes he says relatively reasonable things, but a fair amount of time he says things that make Donald Trump to appear a very sort of moderate, a civilizing force in our political discourse. And there's a couple of other law enforcement organizations that Albanese got money from that enabled him to hit the $175,000 threshold. So he participated in the debates, and I and a couple of other candidates were excluded. So what was particularly frustrating about it is, first of all, just the flat-out unfairness of it, because the system, not surprisingly, but the system favors people who are either wealthy or have access to wealth, and in effect discriminates against campaigns like ours, which was grassroots, which was based on our form of community organizing as applied to a political campaign. We only got small donations. We didn't make the threshold. So I, representing our campaign, didn't have the opportunity to challenge de Blasio directly on a number of his policies, including the policing policy of the city, that are just undeniably, starkly racially biased, that serve no useful purpose, that hurt people every day. Policing, I think, is the most obvious and the most
intrusion
brutal.
in people's
but
daily
our
lives.
so-called affordable housing, lack of mental health care, our incarceration policies, conditions of confinement on Rikers Island, the public schools, and how the city, not only under de Blasio, but under previous mayors, has not paid sufficient attention to providing decent quality of education for the poor Black and Latino students who go to our public schools. And the homeless crisis. 98% of the homeless families in New York City are African American or Latino. So race is a factor, and in effect,
money is the factor that's controlling the political process.
Exactly.
And the lobbying efforts of
money, and also the money in the way the government spends its money. The amount of money spent on law enforcement dollars in New York City is over $10 billion. The lion's share of that goes to the NYPD. And if the city, for example, instituted the policies that we're proposing, we at PROP, that I talked about during our mayoral campaign, and that other police reform organizations are proposing, those proposals would involve significant cutbacks to the NYPD, to the district attorney's office, to the courts, to our jails. The city could literally save billions of dollars that it could then put into providing smaller classes for all the students who, the 1.1 million students who attend our public schools, provide truly affordable housing. A lot of de Blasio's affordable housing program is not providing units that are actually affordable in the neighborhoods where they're being built for the people who live in those neighborhoods. So the so-called affordable housing program on the part of the city is becoming one of the factors that is generating and driving gentrification in the city, driving poor people out of the neighborhoods where they live and where some of them have lived for generations.
It's very helpful the way you link this up. And again, the criminal justice system is so central to this and how it hurts people. And we're just going to put this in a little bit of historical perspective by showing a clip here by Richard Pryor on the police and his feelings about that. This was in 1974. So what's that, 45 years ago. So
1974
it was this clip.
Is 44 years ago, yeah. No, any opportunity to see Richard Pryor perform stand-up, I'm happy to.
Right. So
let's look at this.
Let's look at this. A couple minutes clip here. Richard Pryor back in 1974.
Cops put a hurting on your ass, man, you know. They really degrade you. White folks don't believe that shit, don't believe cops degrade. Oh, come on, those beatings, those people are resisting arrest. I'm tired of this harassment of police officers. Because the police live in your neighborhood, see? And you be knowing them as Officer Timpson. Hello, Officer Timpson, going bowling tonight? Yes, nice Pinto you have. Niggas don't know them like that. See, white folks get a ticket, they pull over. Hey, officer, yes, glad to be of help. Here you go. Nigga got to be talking about, I am reaching into my pocket for my license. Because I don't want to be no motherfucking accident. Police degrade, I don't know, you know, it's often you wonder why a nigga don't go completely mad. You know, you do, you get your shit together, you work all week, right? And then you get dressed, you make, maybe say cat make $125, we get $80 if he lucky. Right, and he go out, get clean, be driving with his old lady, going out to a club, and police pull over. Get out of the car, that was a robbery, a nigga look just like you. All right, put your hands up, take your pants down, spread your cheeks. Now, what nigga feel like having fun after that? Oh, let's just go home, baby. You go home, beat your kids and shit. You're gonna take that shit out on somebody.
Wow. And take that shit out on somebody. I mean, there's a lot there.
It reminds me, a friend of mine is retired now, but he worked for a long, long time as a social worker, providing treatment and sometimes connected to drug treatment programs, methadone treatment programs. And he told me a story once where there was some reason his agency had to have regular contact with police. I'm forgetting why, escorting people, I'm not sure. And he got to know a couple of the cops, and he thought really good guys, very friendly, enjoyed talking sports with them or whatever else was going on at the time. And there was, on one occasion, he was sitting with one of his clients, a Latino guy, and they were sitting together, and one of the cops that he was very friendly with showed up, you know, like across the room. And my friend says to the Latino guy, "Hey, so-and-so, he's a good guy." And the Latino guy says, "No, he's not. You know, he beats the crap out of us on a regular basis." It's obviously an anecdote, but it reflects a reality how white people, my friend's a white guy, I'm a white guy, most white people have, and Pryor was making this point, don't have a very good idea or
any reality that they've gone through.
Of the way police departments and police officers often treat poor people, marginalized people of any kind. It could be homeless people, mentally ill people, sex workers, and treat black and brown people. And it's the cops who engage in it, for the most part, are reflecting the toxic culture and the institutional history of the department they work for. Like, again, we were talking, that's 44 years ago.
So this is not anti-cop as such.
Right.
This is about the structural culture that is built up and the institutional power politically and so on that perpetuates these sorts of attitudes and policies.
One way to think about it is the shibboleth that I first heard maybe in grammar school, maybe in high school, but it's very common: power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think people have a general understanding that that's fundamentally true as a principle of human behavior. And NYPD in New York City, and that's the police department I'm most familiar with, has unchecked power. So a cop engages in the kind of things we saw in the J. Cole video and the kind of things that Pryor was talking about. Nothing's going to happen to them. In fact, the way the NYPD quota system works, if you beat the crap out of somebody and really hurt somebody, but you make an arrest, you're going to get a notch on your belt because the arrest is a step toward making your quota. The cops who arrested Eric Garner, if their actions hadn't led to his death, they would have gotten credit for making that arrest.
Exactly.
And they would have charged him with more than one offense. They would have charged him typically with resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, something called obstructing government administration. At least 3 charges in that one arrest. And that's typically the way the NYPD operates. In fact, if you see an arrest, this is how cynical we at Prop have become, but we know it's grounded in the truth. If you see somebody arrested for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and what they call OGA, or obstructing government administration, you might be prepared even to bet your mortgage that what really happened at arrest is the cops overreacted, beat up somebody or roughed somebody up, And the way they cover for it is laying out, presenting those 3 charges against that person.
And you've seen this for years. I mean, you've been doing this for a good part of your life.
Right.
And so PROP is an organization that you founded.
With other people.
With other people, okay.
In
So I need to put some
2011.
sort of break on this unchecked power.
Yeah. Well, the what we're getting at is the central question, which is not that we know what happens. We continue to do research and issue reports that expose it. A lot of other organizations do, but you could almost put the findings of all our reports and the reports of other organizations under the category no shit. For example, periodically, I'm on Twitter, and obviously I follow the news relating to policing, and you'll read a report. Findings in Milwaukee is that the vast majority of people arrested for marijuana possession are people of color. That's no
Today's
shit.
Times, Baltimore.
Right, Baltimore.
Same thing.
Same. New York City, same thing.
1 out of 4 homicides are not solved.
Yeah.
The resources are going
right.
to
So,
this. Right.
so I think it's important, and it's a lot of what we do, is continue to expose and expose
Monitor
the problem.
Right.
But we're also dealing with the reality is, I know it sounds glib to say, none of this is new. Like the Eric Garner incident, the only thing that's new is there's a video that captured that from the beginning to the end. And you could see in very dramatic terms how reckless and irresponsible those police officers were, both in how they physically manhandled him and piled on him and applied a chokehold, and how they ignored him saying 11 times, "I can't breathe," and how when he was laying, like lifeless on the ground, they stood around for a couple of minutes just chatting as if, they wondered who was going to be the starting pitcher for the Mets game that night.
Yeah.
And so these things have been going on, and similar things, really since the beginning of time. The NYPD was founded in 1845, and part of its purpose then was to control and contain 2 unruly New York City populations, recent Irish immigrants. Of course, the irony there, in decades later, the Irish people would control the police department. And the current commissioner is Joseph O'Neill, is a man of Irish descent. And the other population they targeted were free black people because New York State abolished slavery in 1827. It's always been part of the purpose of police departments.
And it's about hurting. You add that dimension. We're just going to play another little short clip here in a couple of minutes by Yara Allen, who is the chief musician, singer for the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Barber, on Someone Is Hurting My Brother.
Right.
So it's always been about that physical, psychological humiliation, disrespect.
Right. It's not.
What is that about?
It's not.
Why is that?
This is the way sometimes I frame it. It's we at PROP and other people who oppose these practices. It's not so much because they're illegal, which they are, or they're unconstitutional, which they are. It's that they harm people, and they harm people on a not quite right way to put it, on an individual basis, and that person they could physically harm that person, bloody him or her up.
The threat of force, the fear that you're
and it sometimes actually kill people
minds.
for no good reason, and almost always with impunity. Some exceptions, but almost always with no consequences. And the policing also, it's not just policing. It starts with policing, but it's the entire system. The way the courts operate, the way our jails and prisons operate, parole, probation. It's all part of this extraordinarily huge, could say monstrous apparatus that's been created that harms individual people, but also inflicts a kind of collective harm and a collective trauma on a community, primarily low-income black and brown people.
Putting them in their place and making sure they stay there.
Right, and also instilling a certain kind of wariness on the part of many black and brown people, and also a feeling that they don't fully belong to America. Because of the way America has tolerated that the way that they are treated, and at a certain point, I don't know how intentional or purposeful it is. I think some people think it is very intentional and purposeful. What I'm sure of, it is real, and it is the way our system operates, and it is enormously popular. I don't know about popular, enormously powerful.
It's taken the sort of normal.
Right. It's been normalized.
A distorted
in part because
normalization.
it's so entrenched and so
Right.
long-standing.
Yeah. Taken for granted.
Right, and even in a certain way, Pryor was making jokes about it. But there's no question that it inflicts not only physical harm and also economic harm in terms of lesser incomes, in terms of when you get a criminal record, you can lose access to public housing, scholarships, many ways that it could prevent you from having a fulfilling life. But when you are arrested for some low-level thing like driving with a suspended license, the NYPD arrests a lot of people every year for driving with a suspended license, and you get brought into the holding facility, and you are one of 16 people there.
You learn a lesson.
And every one of those other people, maybe with one exception, is a black or brown person. You integrate the reality that the system that governs your society at its basic level, because in some ways the police officers are the most immediate representative of that system, because that's who you see in the streets. They are, on a regular basis, do something that violates you as a person and violates the rights that you think you have because you're an American.
Let's listen briefly here to a clip by Yara Allen.
Okay.
Someone that's hurting my brother. We're not going to take it anymore.
Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Oh, somebody's poisoning the water, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's poisoning the water, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore.
People haven't been silent. You know, it's I was struck by this New York City history. We had a lot of volunteers and interns work for us over the last summer. By the way, if anybody's interested in volunteering, doing an internship with PROP, feel free to contact me. You can go to our website, policereformorganizingproject.org, and send a message that way. My email is rpagangi@gmail.com. rpagangi@gmail.com. Contact me directly. So we had 25 to 30 interns, and it was a wonderful group, and we were being very planful about how do we provide them with a useful experience, and we had this idea we would bring in experts relating to police issues or related issues, and they would spend time with those experts. And one of the people we brought in, oh geez, I'm forgetting his last name at the moment. His first name was Clarence Taylor. It was a professor at Baruch, he's recently retired, and he was an expert on the NYPD, particularly its brutal interactions with people in the black community. Just reading a book about it that has recently been published. And so we brought him in for an interview, with
your interns.
With the interns.
Yeah.
And he brought with him clips from a newspaper that I had never heard of called The People's Voice, that was published in the late 1940s, maybe even before that, but I know because the clips we had were in the 1940s, by Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the original Adam Clayton Powell, who was interesting. None of the young people who were interns knew who he was, so I had to explain. He's a former pastor at Abyssinian Baptist Church,
right.
former congressman, a leading spokesperson related to black people's issues and civil rights issues. And
outspoken, flamboyant, charismatic.
And eventually caught up in a scandal and brought down. But either while he was congressman or before he was congressman, he was involved in publishing The People's Voice, and it had regular stories about police brutality against black people in Harlem. And Clarence brought us some of the clips. And that's the 1940s, so that's 70 years ago. Close to 80 years ago now,
yeah.
And it was publicized. This issue was also brought home to me through Malcolm. Oh, I'm forgetting his name. He used to be the head of the Schoenberg Library in Central Harlem.
Yeah, doesn't ring a.
Damn.
Muhammad?
Muhammad.
Khalil
Khalil Ahmed.
Khalil Gibran.
Yeah, I remember right.
Right. I think he's up at Harvard now.
Yeah, he is. He's a scholar.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrific guy.
And very knowledgeable about African American history.
Yeah.
And he quoted. We had a panel discussion, and he quoted from a paper that he was aware of, and it felt like it could have been written yesterday. And it was actually from a paper written in the 1930s. There had been a disturbance in Harlem, and then there was a commission appointed by LaGuardia to study it and issue a report on it, and it was called the Harlem Riot Report, and it was triggered by an act of police brutality. And
as usually these riots are.
All right.
Almost
every riot
across the board.
that I'm aware of,
right.
except the riots that took place after Martin Luther King was killed,
right.
triggered by an act of police brutality.
Police brutality, right.
Because it goes to the heart of the grievances that the black community feels about how America relates to it and treats it, and particularly how cops treat the black community. And the pieces that Muhammad read were, again, could have been written yesterday, and this goes back to the 1930s. And then politically is also, it's instructive. I mean, what happened to that report politically is LaGuardia, who we all think of as, and I think
most progressive mayor we've ever had.
And the most unapologetic advocate for poor people for doing the right thing.
Even
he buried the report.
Really?
Yeah, because he didn't want to take on the police.
Wow.
So we know that's the history. And we know that every mainstream politician, including mainstream politicians who we think relatively well of, like LaGuardia. I'm a big fan of Obama, for instance, and he did virtually nothing about these issues.
Lindsay didn't either.
Excuse me?
Lindsay?
Yeah, nobody.
His administration.
Dinkins, really. No.
Because
what to you mentioned before we started that you're going to run a clip of a Bob Dylan song about Emmett Till.
Toward the end.
Okay, and when I was preparing for my mayoral race, I happened to read a New York Times review of a book about the Emmett Till case. And the Emmett Till case, some people might not be familiar with it. It was a boy, 13 to 14 years old, I think in the early 1950s, was accused of whistling at a white woman down. I think he was from Chicago, visiting Mississippi.
Visiting relatives in Mississippi.
Right. And whistled or made some inappropriate comment, and then a bunch of white men killed him.
Yeah.
Tortured
Tortured
him.
him.
And his mother famously did not, when they had the wake, left the coffin open
That's right.
to see what
So
they
everyone
had
could
done
see
to her
this.
boy.
It
Right.
was in Jet magazine, and this was just unbelievable.
Right. So
see
this
this.
was a book about the case,
Right.
which the revelatory finding in the book was the author had interviewed the white woman who said, parents said it didn't really happen. The incident that led to Till's death. But even if he had whistled at her, obviously it was, I mean, obviously no justification
right,
for murder and torture. Right.
Exactly.
But what stood out for me was the book quoted Chester Himes, who again most young people won't be familiar with, a black novelist who was alive at that time. I think he wrote detective novels that were set in Harlem, and he was a well-known literary figure. And Himes said, I won't remember the quote exactly, but this was right after the news broke that the men who were put on trial for killing Emmett Till were found not guilty. And he said the most disturbing thing for him as a black man, again, I'm not quoting it exactly, was when his mind came to terms with the fact that America really doesn't want to do anything about this. Because if it did, it would. And that's fundamentally true. Now, white Americans might be very upset about what happened to Emmett Till. I think
but still would not be able to take minimal action that could begin to stop
now,
these things
Now,
happening.
having said that, the black people are, there's no question that the violence that used to take place against black people regularly in the South has been significantly reduced. The lynchings, the kind of killing and torture of Emmett Till, as far as we know, don't happen anymore at all, or if they do, in much fewer numbers. But the fundamental reality of our law enforcement forces, in some way or another, either carrying out different kinds of brutality against people of color without any punishment, or protecting people who carry out those kind of violent acts against people of color or against poor people, homeless people, and not sufficiently punishing them. We haven't taken the steps to stop that kind of thing. And I see it mainly in terms, actually not so much what happened to Emmett Till, which was white men outside law enforcement killing him and then being, in effect, protected and exonerated by the system, is what cops do now to people of color, being rarely punished or sanctioned. And it's because the system doesn't want to take the steps to stop it, because the steps would be the powers that be.
The invested powers resist it.
Resist it because at least in part because it's too controversial. Like, for example, what would have to happen, let's say in the case of the Eric Garner incident, where you had 5 or 6 cops jump him, pile on him, one cop, a guy named Pantaleo, using the chokehold, which is prohibited by the NYPD. And again, with him saying 11 times, I can't breathe, they're ignoring that. What should have happened, and the kind of thing that, if it happened, could be a meaningful step to stopping it from happening again, is the mayor should have fired all those people day after the video came out. You don't need new process. You saw, excuse me, what the fuck happened. And instead of their being fired, as you know, Jim, they all still work for the NYPD. Still, this is now 4.5 years later. They still work for the NYPD. That sends a message to cops and to the community that you could do something as egregious as what we saw in the video that led directly to a man's death, and you don't get punished. So, of course, if you arrest somebody and charge them with possessing a gravity knife or petty larceny or smoking a joint, and you just made it up, You know nothing's going to happen to you because nothing happened to those cops who killed Eric Garner.
And the good cops on the side, you probably know this Serpico statement that 10% are totally corrupt, 10% are totally honest, and 80% would like to be honest.
Yeah.
And so you have a system that doesn't enable them. The good cops, the ones who want to do their job,
will
are
often
trying to
go
do their
along.
job, will go along.
Right.
And
also 10% in New York City, that's a high number.
Yeah.
I mean, we have 3,500 cops. That's
35,000.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
10% is 3,500 people. I suspect, but who knows, Serpico is from 40 years ago now.
Well, 1970, early 70s.
Yeah, so that's going on 50 years ago, right?
Now, and we, unfortunately, Manny Gomez, who's been on the show before, and that the documentary I told you about, that our audience knows about too, Crime Plus Punishment. Manny is a private investigator who was prominently featured in that show, and has now been the author of a bill for the Department of Civilian Justice that is now going to be
up in the state legislature.
The state legislature.
And it's called the Department of Civilian Justice.
I just want to, in Manny's own words here, because Manny has been such an energetic advocate for this. He's been himself just going night and day for years, and it caught up to him a little bit. And he's now has pneumonia, and he wanted to be here very much. In fact, he was in the VA hospital for a day and a half. Yeah. They and got to calm down.
Take it easy.
And he wanted very much. In fact, last night, as near as last night, he called and said, "I still want to try to make it," and because he wanted to meet you and wanted to talk a little about this. He couldn't make it, but
because of my personality.
No, you know, on his deathbed he wanted to. But I said, "Look, we'll get you. We'll meet another time." Sure. But this is his bill now, in his own words. I just want a paragraph about it, and I think it touches on so much of what you've been talking about and what needs to happen. So this is, excuse me, the Department of Civilian Justice bill. It's my goal. This is Manny Gomez in his own words here. It's my goal to make a bill which can be followed by every state in the United States. The new state bill, New York State bill, will provide a mechanism for justice where currently there is none. The new agency will have oversight powers over all the state police departments, the DA offices, Department of Corrections statewide. The agency will also have subpoena powers and the ability to hold administrative hearings, as well as the ability to suspend or fire anyone found guilty of corruption regardless of their position. The Department of Civilian Justice will provide regular citizens the ability to report corruption from the DA's office, police departments, and Department of Corrections. We'll have investigators and judges who are not affiliated with any other state agency to ensure that fair and impartial investigation and hearings are provided to the public. In addition, it will also provide the ability for police officers to report police corruption themselves without fear of none of this internal affairs business, to report police corruption without fear of retaliation, and ensure that a fair investigation is conducted. Anyone preventing a Department of Civilian Justice investigator from securing evidence will be automatically suspended, regardless of position or appointment. The Department of Civilian Justice bill will bring accountability to the agencies, in addition, providing a voice to the voiceless against current injustices.
So, that certainly does get at.
Does it? That's what I want to. And some of the stuff you've been doing.
Right, and some of the stuff we're proposing. I mean,
proposing, right?
To get back, and this is where it overlaps with Manny's proposed bill.
Right.
To get back to the things that should happen. To stop the Eric Garner incidents from recurring.
Exactly.
One is immediate dismissal of the officers who engaged in the violence. That would send a message. The other, and this is
dismissal meaning.
Well, what the mayor has
suspension, firing.
What the mayor has the power to do is to suspend people without pay, regardless of whatever the union contract says.
Okay.
So
and if they are suspended, they're always getting paid, right?
Right. So, this is suspended without pay.
Without pay. No,
right.
I understand.
Right. So now they under the mayor's powers, they still have a right to, I don't know if it's an internal hearing within the department or within city government.
Okay.
They still have a right to what some might call some form of due process. But when the mayor takes that step, I mean, de Blasio has never taken that step, and not that we had properly studied this, I don't recall any mayor taking that step, where we haven't had a woman mayor, where he makes that decision on his own. rather than waiting for some kind of internal disciplinary process within the department.
I
mean, to show what a mockery of a just response to the Garner incident is, the NYPD is just getting around to an internal hearing on one of the officers, not all the officers, on Dan Pantaleo, almost 5 years after the incident happened.
So the first thing that needs to be done is
Dismissal.
Okay.
And the other is that we have created, and this is where
But there's got to be due process
propose,
too.
What?
You're not saying there's no due process, but that's the first thing that happens.
First thing, yeah, the mayor, without any hearing, sees the video
So
or whatever,
egregious.
you guys are out.
Right,
You
got it.
kill somebody.
Right.
And the second thing, and this is where the Manny's bill overlaps with what we've proposed, is there should be outside independent prosecutors whose only job is to investigate allegations of police brutality. Not necessarily, not only where there was a fatality, not only where the person was unarmed, any allegation of police brutality, excessive use of force. That office investigates. It's outside of the 5 district attorneys' offices in New York City.
Independent, autonomous.
It's independent, and that's its only job.
Okay.
So it gets
All right.
measured against, the performance of that office gets measured against how effective and truthful those investigations and where appropriate prosecutions were. Right now, as you know, the first review was done by the police department itself, which it's ineffective to have an institution investigate an action by a member of that institution, where a lot of people who run that institution are going to think anybody who's found guilty of misconduct reflects badly on the institution.
So they all stick together.
So there's an incentive for that institution to give a very minimum punishment or no punishment at all. In the Pantaleo case, they may make a political decision that it's probably going to serve our interest if we actually do punish this guy, so that we could at least claim in the Garner incident,
he's an outlier.
somebody paid a price.
Yeah,
and he's an outlier, he's a rotten apple.
Right.
So immediate dismissal, an independent investigation, not done by the NYPD or district attorney.
Good.
And the third thing would be to end broken windows policing. The day-to-day policing that cops engage in New York City and in many other cities in our country.
Which is
Forster.
quota-driven.
Quota-driven.
Which they will deny, and they
Right.
call something else.
Right, productivity goals.
Productivity
but
goals.
Clearly quota-driven,
Business,
but which
model.
fosters an attitude about the people you're applying broken windows to, that their lives don't matter as much as the lives of white people, or as much of lives of middle-class people or law-abiding people. So that it makes broken windows kind of policing, which is imposed on cops, they have to one way or another carry it out, and they have to meet their quota every day, will foster in some police officers a more cavalier attitude about the lives and well-being of the people they're interacting with. So more likely that they will engage in physical force or excessive force or brutality without thinking in some ways that it's anything wrong, because these people have it coming.
Right. And gosh, we've got a couple more minutes on this. So this is very important. As you know, in the Times article today in Baltimore, the chief prosecutor is trying to do that, and the police union is
The chief
pushing back.
prosecutor is saying she won't prosecute low-level marijuana cases.
Right. But the
cops
police
are
union
saying
is
no.
saying no.
Right.
So they want to keep pursuing the policy.
Right. And they want to keep
version of broken
using
windows.
the application of force to solve problems,
Right.
rather than more nuanced, more sophisticated, more effective, more humane responses.
And now what have they had? 5 or 6 police commissioners in the last couple of years? In Baltimore now, so they're going to come again. And Baltimore, what, 80, 70% African-American?
I believe it's 2/3.
Two-thirds, something like that.
About that.
Right, and so here we are now, the clash of wills. Who's going to win? And the power and the
where
money.
the power is, where the
Yeah,
power is.
where the
and
power- fight the power,
getting
right.
to what we would call for, I just laid out what we call for
Right.
to deal with egregious acts of brutality.
Right.
But in our view, the main problem is the day-to-day casual form of brutality and injustice through things like broken windows policing. And the only way to stop that is significantly reduce the number of police officers, the budget, the power of police
and
departments.
use the money to the programs
and
that really-
services
services
that
are
would help
really-
people that now the
Right.
system is hurting. And that's, it shouldn't be, but that's a radical agenda. And there's no mainstream politician that will now support that agenda. And this includes politicians who we think well of, like I think well of, I'll just speak for myself,
Right.
like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah,
Or Alexandria
Ocasio-Cortez.
Right, who I think very well of. I don't know what her positions are on these
Right,
kind of
it's
issues.
still being formed, and my goodness, we're about out of time here. We've got 30 seconds, so we want to remind our audience you've been really helpful and articulate in getting this out, and we understand the issues much better now. I know our audience does, and I do too as well. Contact you, people out there, become an intern.
Police Reform Organizing Project. Go to our website or contact me by email. It's RPA, Robert Peter Ralford is my whole name, Gangi,
Okay.
Gangi @gmail.com. And either I will respond or another a volunteer or a member of our staff will respond.
And listen to
WBAI 630, 99.5
Justice
FM.
Matters, right?
Justice Matters with Bob Gangi,
Bob-
or go to the archives.
6:30
WBAI.
p.m. Thursday.
6:30 Thursday, and we're on tomorrow night, 6:30.
Tomorrow night. Terrific, Bob.
Thank you, Jim.
It's been
Appreciate it.
enormously helpful and
I hope
wonderful
so.
to have you
Yeah,
here.
thank you.